Hey everyone, welcome back to the Workforce Workshop. I'm your host Chiraz Kelly, and today we're diving into a topic that's both timely and impactful: employment under Trump's trade policies. From tariffs on Chinese goods to renegotiated trade deals like the USMCA, the Trump administration's approach to trade had significant effects on the US job market. In this video, we'll explore how these policies shaped employment across industries, the winners and losers, and what it means for the future of work in America. Let's get started. Overview of Trump's trade policies. First, let's break down the key trade policies implemented during the Trump administration. These policies were centered on protecting American industries, reducing trade deficits, and bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. 1. Tariffs on Chinese goods. The Trump administration imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports, aiming to pressure China into fairer trade practices and protect U.S. industries. These tariffs covered a wide range of products, from electronics to machinery, and were part of a broader strategy to address intellectual property theft and unfair trade practices. 2. Renegotiation of NAFTA. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was replaced by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which included provisions to boost U.S. manufacturing and auto industries. The USMCA required a higher percentage of vehicles to be made with North American parts and labor, aiming to bring jobs back to the U.S. 3. Steel and aluminum tariffs. Tariffs were imposed on steel and aluminum imports from various countries to protect domestic producers. These tariffs were justified under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which allows the president to impose tariffs for national security reasons. 4. Trade wars. The administration engaged in trade disputes with multiple countries, including the European Union, Canada, and Mexico, to rebalance trade relationships. These disputes often involved threats of tariffs and counter-tariffs, creating uncertainty in global markets. These policies were controversial, with supporters arguing they protected American jobs and critics warning they could lead to higher costs and economic instability. Impact on manufacturing jobs. One of the primary goals of Trump's trade policies was to revive U.S. manufacturing, a sector that had seen significant job losses over the decades. 1. Short-term gains. In the short term, some manufacturing sectors saw job growth. For example, the steel and aluminum industries benefited from tariffs that made imported goods more expensive, giving domestic producers a competitive edge. Companies like U.S. Steel and Nucor announced plans to reopen plants and hire more workers. 2. Long-term challenges. However, the long-term impact was mixed. While some jobs were created, many manufacturers faced higher costs for raw materials due to tariffs, which led to layoffs in industries reliant on steel and aluminum, such as automotive and construction. For example, Harley-Davidson moved some production overseas to avoid tariffs on European exports, leading to job losses in the U.S. 3. Supply chain disruptions. Tariffs on Chinese goods disrupted global supply chains, forcing companies to rethink their sourcing strategies. Some businesses moved production back to the U.S., but others shifted to countries like Vietnam and Mexico to avoid tariffs. This created a complex landscape for manufacturers, with some benefiting from reshoring efforts, while others struggled with increased costs. Effects on agriculture. The agricultural sector was one of the hardest hit by Trump's trade policies. 1. Retaliatory tariffs. In response to U.S. tariffs, China imposed retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural products like soybeans, pork, and dairy. This led to a significant drop in exports and financial strain for farmers. For example, soybean exports to China fell by nearly 50% in 2018, causing prices to plummet and leaving many farmers struggling to stay afloat. 2. Government aid. To offset the impact, the Trump administration provided billions of dollars in subsidies to farmers. The Market Facilitation Program, MFP, distributed over $28 billion in aid between 2018 and 2020. While this helped in the short term, It wasn't a sustainable solution for long-term economic stability. 3. Shift in markets. Some farmers diversified their markets, looking to other countries to replace lost Chinese demand. However, this transition was slow and costly. For example, some soybean farmers began exporting to countries like Egypt and Argentina, but these markets couldn't fully compensate for the loss of Chinese demand. Impact on technology and innovation. The tech industry faced its own set of challenges under Trump's trade policies. 1. Supply chain issues. Tariffs on Chinese electronics and components increased costs for U.S. tech companies, many of which rely on China for manufacturing. For example, companies like Apple and Dell faced higher costs for components like semiconductors and circuit boards, which were subject to tariffs. 2. Innovation slowdown. Higher costs and supply chain disruptions slowed down innovation and product development in some sectors. Companies had to allocate more resources to managing tariffs and finding alternative suppliers, diverting attention from research and development. 3. Global competition. U.S. tech companies faced increased competition from foreign firms that weren't subject to the same tariffs, putting pressure on domestic innovation. For example, Chinese tech companies like Huawei and Xiaomi gained a competitive edge in global markets by offering lower prices. Retail and consumer goods. Retailers and consumers also felt the impact of Trump's trade policies. 1. Higher prices. Tariffs on Chinese goods led to higher prices for consumer products, from electronics to clothing. This squeezed both retailers and consumers. For example, tariffs on imported washing machines led to price increases of up to 20%, according to a study by the University of Chicago. 2. Job losses. Some retailers, particularly small businesses, struggled to absorb the increased costs and were forced to lay off workers or close stores. For example, the National Retail Federation estimated that tariffs could cost the U.S. economy up to 1 million jobs. 3. Shift to e-commerce. The rise of e-commerce helped some retailers mitigate the impact by sourcing products from alternative markets, but this wasn't an option for all businesses. For example, large retailers like Walmart and Target were able to negotiate better deals with suppliers, while smaller retailers faced greater challenges. The role of the USMCA. The renegotiation of NAFTA into the USMCA was a cornerstone of Trump's trade policy. 1. Auto industry boost. The USMCA included provisions to increase North American content requirements for automobiles, aiming to bring more auto manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. For example, the agreement required that 75% of a vehicle's components be made in North America, up from 62.5% under NAFTA. 2. Labor protections. The agreement also included stronger labor protections, which supporters argued would level the playing field for American workers. For example, the USMCA required Mexico to allow workers to form unions and bargain collectively, addressing concerns about low wages and poor working conditions. 3. Mixed results. While the USMCA provided some benefits, its long-term impact on employment remains debated. Some industries saw job growth, while others faced challenges adapting to the new rules. For example, automakers like General Motors and Ford announced investments in U.S. plants, but some suppliers struggled to meet the higher content requirements. Winners and losers. Trump's trade policies created both winners and losers in the job market. Winners. Steel and aluminum workers saw job growth due to tariffs. For example, U.S. Steel announced plans to reopen a plant in Illinois, creating 800 jobs. Some manufacturing sectors benefited from reshoring efforts. For example, companies like Stanley Black, Decker, and Caterpillar announced plans to bring production back to the U.S. Farmers received government aid, though this was a temporary solution. Losers. Agricultural exporters faced significant losses due to retaliatory tariffs. For example, soybean farmers lost billions in revenue as exports to China plummeted. Retailers and consumers dealt with higher prices and job losses. For example, tariffs on imported goods led to price increases for products like electronics and clothing. Tech companies struggled with increased costs and supply chain disruptions. For example, Apple faced higher costs for components like semiconductors and circuit boards. The future of employment under trade policies. As we look to the future, the lessons from Trump's trade policies offer valuable insights. 1. Balancing protectionism and globalization. While protecting domestic industries is important, policies must also consider the interconnected nature of the global economy. For example, tariffs can protect jobs in one sector, but harm others by increasing costs and disrupting supply chains. 2. Investing in workforce development. To compete in a changing economy, the U.S. must invest in education and training programs to prepare workers for high-demand industries. For example, programs focused on advanced manufacturing and technology can help workers adapt to new challenges. 3. Building resilient supply chains. The disruptions caused by tariffs highlight the need for more resilient and diversified supply chains. For example, companies can reduce reliance on single suppliers by sourcing from multiple countries. 4. Focusing on innovation. Encouraging innovation and supporting tech industries will be key to maintaining a competitive edge in the global market. For example, investments in research and development can help U.S. companies stay ahead of foreign competitors. And there you have employment under Trump's trade policies and their impact on the U.S. job market. From manufacturing and agriculture to tech and retail, these policies reshaped industries in ways that are still being felt today. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Workforce Workshop, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. And hey, drop a comment below, let me know your thoughts on Trump's trade policies or share how they impacted your industry. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.